I better be careful, nation. People might get upset, or even try to troll me if I actually have an opinion. I'm so scared. Maybe I shouldn't do this album review. Nah, I'm going to do it. I'm definitely going to do it because this is an album that some of you guys wanted to have me talk about. I want to talk about it, and I think it is time for us to talk about it. Why? Because last year, around this time, I celebrated an early Christmas. The reason why was because back then, the new Limp Bizkit album was coming out. It was guaranteed views, it was guaranteed that I was going to listen to it, and I thought I was going to bash it all the Kingdom Come. I ended up bashing it somewhat, however. For the most part, I couldn't delve into too much aside from Fred Durst. We're here to talk about a band that's very similar in nature, given that they're from the same time period, and really from the same realm of metal, which is nu metal. We're here to talk about Living Things by the band Linkin Park, which is their long-awaited 5th studio album, which will be released on the 26th of this month of June. Now, Linkin Park has kind of forged a very strange pathway to stardom, and it's something that has begun right whenever they came out, and has kind of dwindled down a little bit in time. However, they still have a rabid fan base. So whenever this album came out, after albums such as Minutes to Midnight and 1,000 Suns, which some fans partook as kind of a deviation from the norm, well, there are some people that are approaching this album with a certain degree of apprehension. However, then a song like Burn It Down came out, and I think kind of distilled a little bit of those rumors or some of those threats. But is the whole album like that? Or are they going to be completely satisfied? Well, that's what I'm here to talk to you about. With this album, how I feel is pretty mixed, because there is a large mix on this album. Now, in many cases, I like to boast that variety is a huge positive for some albums. However, there are some cases where an overextension of variety can sometimes bog an album down, make it feel very disjointed, almost like it's ADD, kind of going from one idea to the next without any real form or fashion. This album doesn't exactly have that problem. However, this is an album that they stuck to two things that they were good at, that they typically and traditionally combined, which is the influence of being like a heavy rock band, almost sometimes being termed as a metal band, but then adding hip-hop and rap influences as well, while at some purposes just being a straight-up arena rock band. I mean, this is a band that's able to encompass many envelopes. I'll talk a little bit more about their career, or should I say I did, in the retrospective. However, for this album here, it seems like they're trying to divide and conquer a little bit. There's a couple of tracks where they're going to showcase what they're good at, which is, of course, mishmashing the two together. And that's going to be on songs, like I said, the aforementioned Burn It Down, or the very first track on the album is another good example as well. And then there's other tracks where it just seems to really... It's like an idea that just went terribly wrong, almost like they're trying to breach on pop territory, like the next pop diva or One Direction or something tried to go like horrifically metal and scream at the top of their lungs. Lies, Greed, Misery really is that song for me. I know a lot of people, whenever they hear this, are probably going to love it. They're going to eat it up. But whenever I listen to this, it just seems really forced, almost though they oversimplified the formula a little bit and just tried to really faux the hardness, the harshness of it by screaming at the top of their lungs. They're still experimenting a lot on this album, though. They're still giving a lot of thought to the idea of experimentation that they did in the last two albums. And this is a band that, for a long time, said that their next album could be anything from Metallica to Coldplay, so they definitely have given themselves a real diverse range. And not to mention, I think it was Minutes to Midnight was compared to Kid A by Radiohead by some reviewers from the Rolling Stone, I believe. And that's kind of a really strange phenomenon whenever you consider that album. Whenever you consider the fan base, that really, how they responded to that record. They weren't exactly too thrilled with it. And yet, of course, Kid A is one of the most beloved Radiohead albums probably of all time. So it's kind of a strange little polarization there, but it's definitely the differences being in two different bands. Then you hit the second half of the album, and it almost seems like there's a little bit more of a hip-hop approach going on, and it seems to be more of a center point. There's a lot of big beats. There's a lot of back and forth rhyming. It's almost like these guys are trying to be the modern-day Beastie Boys or something like that, only giving it a even harder edge than the Beasties were able to offer us in the late 80s and early 1990s. So that's another strange little phenomenon as well. Overall, this is an album that I'm going to kind of imprint this way. I'm going to give it two separate numbers. One's my personal number, and then one's the actual review. On a personal basis, I think that this is an album that for me, just kind of falls flat because it seems like it's going everywhere, and I probably just kind of outgrew this stuff. I was a Linkin Park fan whenever I was much smaller, whenever they first came out, because they were able to blend, you know, many different things that I enjoyed, so I have to admit that to everybody. So, but this album I really just feel is about middle of the road, about a 5 out of 10 or something like that, which for me is traditionally pretty low. But if we're going to use a 5-star system, that's about 2.5 stars, so that's not looking as bad. From a traditional reviewer standpoint, listening to this record, there is a good use of diversity. They're definitely highlighting their strengths as much as they can and trying to accentuate them in what they do. There is a lot of rehashing and kind of nostalgia towards the elder sound that came out on albums such as Hybrid Theory, while mixing in incorporations of what they did on the remix album for Hybrid Theory, which was entitled Reanimation, which is also my favorite Linkin Park album out of all of them. So that combination would traditionally seem to be a pretty good idea, but it just seems to fall flat even on a professional level. I couldn't give this any more than a 7 out of 10 because it's just, while it does have catchy hooks and it does at times present itself as a very aggressive album, I just feel like the novelty factor is kind of worn down a little bit. Now, the experimentation is kind of what brings the score up a little bit. The fact that the diversity is no longer being used completely in a combination effect. Instead, they're trying to separate and kind of divide and conquer, as I had mentioned. However, I just don't know if this is the album that is going to be kind of like a true transition album, almost like a late 80s era U2 album, where they transition more into the huge, big arena rock from the alternative roots, or even like a Milo Xyloto by Coldplay, where it showed them kind of, once again, we're going back to the U2 or even REM territory, where they crafted an album that was a little bit different than what they've done previously, however, still staying true to their to what they're really all about. So, there you go. From two separate standpoints, this is an album that's probably about a 2.5 star, 3-star album. 3.5 stars probably at the absolute most. If you're a fan of this kind of music, if you're watching this review because you like Linkin Park, then I highly suggest you pick this up, because I think you're going to find enough on here that you're going to enjoy, that it's not going to feel like a total bust of a purchase. For those who avoid Linkin Park as it stands, it's not going to really change that much. You're still going to want to avoid them. But if you're looking for something just for a late night laugh or just for fun, then this may be an album for you to conjure up. That's what I have to say. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. I'm coverkillernation, and as always, we are all human. We all make mistakes. I don't believe I made a mistake with this album review. For those things I've made mistakes in the past, whether it be about people, albums, things, I apologize. We're all human. We're all living things.